Time to get everyone introduced. The reason we're here together with our colleagues from the Senate Ag Committee is so that we can hear at the same time from the logging community and the impacts that the flooding and other weather events had over the summer and throughout the fall and maybe beyond. So I will allow the witnesses to provide their own testimony on that. But I'm going to just go around the room quickly and introduce the members of the House Committee, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Starr, who will introduce the members of his committee, and then I think we're going to let him run the meeting as well. So if there are questions that any of you have for the witness, you can ask Senator Starr, and I'm sure he'll be happy to give you permission to speak. So I'm David Durfee. I'm chair of the House Committee on Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry, and I represent the Bennington 3 District. Shaftesbury is my hometown. And let's just go around the table here for House Committee.
Sure, I'm Supernat. I'm vice chair of the House Ag Committee. I represent Windsor 4, the Council Partner, Alfred Bridgewater.
Hello, everyone. I'm Representative Esme Cole, and I represent Windsor 6, which is Hartford, Vermont.
Good morning, John O'Brien, Windsor Orange 1. I represent Royalton in my hometown of Tunbridge.
Mike Rice, represent the Bennington Rutland District, Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
Josie Levitt, Grandal Chittenden, which is all of Grandal County and a sliver of West Milton.
David Templeman, Orleans 3, Barton, Brownington, and Westmore, and I'm from Brownington.
Senator Charles Wilson from Caledonia 3, which is Linden, Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, and Newark.
Representative Henry Pearl. I represent the towns of Danville, Peacham, and Cabot.
Representative Jed Lipsky, represent Lamoille 1, town of Stowe.
Brian Graham, represent 3, which is Williamstown, Chelsea.
And I'm Bobby Starr, senator from Orleans County, and I want to thank Dave and you folks for hosting this meeting. Our room is kind of a lot smaller than your room, and so we really appreciate that and glad to be here. And my committee is starting here on the right with Vice Chair.
Brian Collin, representing Rutland County, all 27 towns.
Irene Renner, Chittenden North, Milton, Fairfax, Westford, and Essex, where I live.
Rich Westman, and I represent the Homeland District.
Brian Campion, Bennington County, particularly Shaftesbury and Dorset.
So to get started this morning, this past summer, I had a call from my buddy Sam Lincoln, who wanted to meet and brought Dana along. They're in the process of setting up a new organization, I believe, called the Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast. And Dana has worked putting that all together with the state of Maine. And so they wanted to meet and talk about setting that up and how we might proceed to try to help them. Our ag and forestry people have had a real bad year this past year with all the rain and the frost and early frost that kind of nipped the grapes and apple buds and so anyways, to get started, I wanted to get this going early in the session so that when you're doing something new, it certainly takes time and a little money. And we know, I think the House members have been probably told, like we have on the other side, that money's going to be a little tighter this year, but I want to make sure that we get our fair share. If there needs to be some some financing done here. One advantage that we have on the Senate side in regards to that is both Senator Westman and myself sit on the Appropriations Committee. And I'm sure you've all heard the tale that Bill Doyle used to say, if you didn't have a seat at the table, you were on the menu. Well, I spent a lot of years on the menu. And so anyways, it's again good to get here, and we'll get right down to business. And I'll introduce you, Sam. Then you can introduce your crew, and we can get right underway. So good to have you back, Sam. Sam, I don't know if some of you maybe know Sam. He was the deputy commissioner, I believe, of Forest and Parks, and we did quite a few good things while Sam was here, and has helped. Certainly, back then we helped the logging industry with their workers' comp and some of those things, and very excellent person to work with. And so welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Senator Starr, for that generous introduction. And we did great. We did unprecedented things. We got a lot of things done that have been a challenge for years with your help and the committee's help.
Thank you, Chairman Starr, Chairman Durfee, for coordinating this hearing to discuss the impacts of the weather on the forest economy, and to the respective committees for taking your time and giving us your attention today. For the record, my name is Sam Lincoln. I own a master logger certified mechanized timber harvesting business in Randolph Center. I am part of a multi-generational family that owns farm and forest land. Proud father of 2 sons, 17 and 20 years old, both starting their way with their own working lands businesses. I have worked on timber harvesting projects for over 50 individual landowners within 15 miles of my home in the past 25 years. Many of them repeat clients during that time, including 3 legislators, generated millions of dollars in revenue for them. In addition to our family's agricultural enterprise, I've conservatively estimate that I've spent well over 17,000 hours in a machine in the forests of Vermont, not including the time planning, coordinating, and managing timber harvests, attending training, and advocating for the sector as a volunteer. How do professional logging contractors perform their work? Planning and logistics. Timber harvesting requires preparation. That includes meeting with landowners, consulting foresters, regulatory foresters from our power plants, walking the site multiple times to observe conditions, map, plan, hang flagging, and doing everything we can to ensure a properly executed timber harvest will take place. Communicating with sawmills, log buyers, and brokers to understand up to the minute market conditions before calculating the potential income and expenses of the job to prepare a proper stumpage proposal. Talking with equipment and log haulers, quarry operators, dump truck drivers to get all the necessary equipment and supplies on site at just the right time, and then haul the forest products away to market. Preparing a closeout plan to be certain that when your harvest is swept out as you leave the job and your tracks are cleaned up, that the water quality is securely protected until the next harvest. Knocking on the doors of abutting neighbors to introduce yourself, explain the temporary disturbance, answer their questions, and put a face to the name on your sign next to the job at the roadside. As they say, a job well planned is half done. What have logging contractors been experiencing this year? Significantly fewer workable days. Business owners like me can manage those logistics I spoke about, but not the weather. Professional loggers depend on the additional requirement of suitable ground conditions, such as dry or frozen soil, to avoid soil and root damage or creating the potential for erosion, sedimentation in our streams. Unlike the controlled environments of factories or offices, we must adapt to the weather and manage around ground conditions to meet a large array of expectations. If those conditions are not suitable, we must shut down our operations, which immediately and directly impacts our finances relative to the frequency and duration of the unsuitable conditions. While the average Vermonter goes to work at a regular 9-to-5 job, accumulates about 240 work days in a year, the weather historically allows logging contractors 160 to 180 days of timber harvesting. This summer, when we returned to work after mud season, it started raining steadily. I was shut down on a job 2 weeks prior to the July 10th flood with unable to work. Conditions were just too wet. On a job that should have taken 3 weeks, after 9 weeks, we had produced the equivalent of 3 days production in normal conditions. I had to implement temporary closeout measures to protect the trails from erosion and move my equipment off the site to start a new job site where we had better but still limited operation. From the period between June 1st and October 1st of 2023, I worked 23 days. In the 6 weeks between Thanksgiving and New Year's, we worked 13 days due to continuous rain and above freezing temperatures. When we can work, production is low due to the need to lay down brush armoring or corduroy in the trails to distribute the weight of machines in wet areas and to protect from erosion. We frequently have to install temporary water bars in advance of these severe rain events that we've been having. We're spreading mulch for erosion control, installing culverts, bridges, creating diversion ditches, many other practices that we can to manage the extraordinary amount of water coming off the hills and out of the ground. The prolonged wet weather reduced our the low range of 160 days. In 2022, we only worked 121 days. 2023, we closed out the year at 104 days. This represents a 35% drop compared to a typical year. In fiscal year 2023, my timber harvesting revenue has decreased overall by 22%. And during the period of June 1st to October 1st, 82% loss of revenue. To stay afloat, I've used savings. I've done excavation work to repair roads for the town highway department, split firewood nights and weekends, and borrowed money from my line of credit. Why is our work important? Why would somebody keep doing this? While carrying out this work and managing for a host of important goals, including forest health, water quality, wildlife habitat management, Vermont's logging contractors are responsible for the production of two very important things. $27 million in stumpage revenue that we pass through to forest landowners for their timber that we harvest, and the creation of raw materials used in products that are essential for human existence. We learned during the pandemic that forest products from Vermont are transformed into medical supplies, food packaging, heat hospitals, schools, and homes, build temporary medical sites, bedding for livestock, and many other examples that we take for granted until just one day it's all exposed for being very vulnerable to uncontrollable forces. What we're asking for today, I communicated with the administration this summer, legislators, representatives of the federal delegation, nonprofit organizations that were raising money for flood relief to determine if anything could be done for our sector. Our damages have primarily been to business revenue, not physical damage to buildings, land, equipment, or crops, and therefore not eligible for any funds that have been distributed. Our sector has been denied relief when agricultural producers, a vitally important companion working land sector, has received millions in programmatic relief. Headlines, promises of more relief from the federal delegation, fundraising and grants from nonprofit organizations. I do not dismiss or diminish the serious needs and impacts that so many Vermonters, not just ag producers, not just forestry, but so many Vermonters have experienced a lot. But our sector has been is not, I don't understand why our sector has not had any relief funds committed or adapted to fit our losses. I'm extremely reluctant to be here today to invest taxpayer dollars for my business, but I know my example is common and widespread across the state. Many businesses like mine are in jeopardy and many are already dispersing equipment. I respectfully request that you at least make our sector and revenue losses eligible for any additional relief programs and funds that are appropriated as soon as possible. Before stopping to take any questions, I will mention, as Senator Starr did, that our next witness, Dana Duran, is Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast, is here today to introduce himself and our new organization that Vermont loggers and log haulers are joining. The PLC's policy proposals were developed in direct response to the weather and economic situation that we're facing with the assistance of Representatives Lipsky and Sims. H624 was recently introduced, and we look forward to discussing that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Did you want to have Dana go next, or are you open for questions?
I'll take questions if you'd like.
Yeah, are there questions from any of the reps or senators? John?
Sam, what's happening downstream then, since there are no raw materials coming to mills, et cetera? Are they all feeling this too?
I believe so, Representative O'Brien. We have Trevor and Cliff Allard here from Allard Lumber Company and Sawmill to talk about that. So.
And Rodney?
I just understand that A. Johnson lumber shut down? Is that permanent?
The A. Johnson sawmill in Bristol is shut down permanently as of the end of November, is my understanding.
Sam, you folks in the timber industry, you weren't like the PP program that the feds had where you had lost labor help. You couldn't qualify for any of that federal money?
During the pandemic or as the part of the flood?
Well, during the pandemic.
During the pandemic, I believe the forest products industry qualified. Vermont, the legislature stood up the Forest Economy Stabilization Grant Program, which was it was $5 million appropriation, of which $3.6 million were administered through that to the forest economy, businesses up and down the supply chain that could demonstrate an impact and loss. I believe logging businesses were eligible for payroll protection program. And Dana can speak to the timber harvesting and hauling relief program that was stood up by the federal government.
But this flood stuff, there wasn't any help from Agency of Commerce and Community Development.
Revenue loss was not an eligible impact from the flooding. There were a number of loggers that reported they had tens of thousands of dollars of timber cut in the woods that they couldn't reach with the equipment. And if they could demonstrate that as a physical loss, I believe that was eligible, but it was 20% or $20,000, whichever was more. And I talked to people that had far more than that and timber left in the woods. We're on a job now salvaging timber from a logger that had to abandon a job in June, that the wood was cut and left and we had to go back. We're in there now cleaning that up at a loss to the landowner to some extent. So.
And how soon do you have to extract that timber once it's cut before it starts going the other way?
All depends on the species, the humidity, the moisture, temperature, things like that. But we're cutting some pretty high value maple wood, some pretty nice veneer logs that are going on the firewood pile. So, which is a pretty big hit to the landowner.
That's not good.
Yeah.
Well, did you any other questions? If not, you want to turn it over to Dana?
Yes, thank you.
Our paper copies of my testimony, did you already circulate it? If you want, I can give these to you to circulate if you'd like.
I've circulated it digitally.
Oh, you did? You folks want the paper copies? Sure.
Well, welcome to Vermont, Dana. Good to see you again.
Yes, thank you. Pleasure to be here. Senator Starr, Senator Collmore, members of the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Representative Durfee, Representative, is it Supernaut? Got it. And Representative Graham and members of the House Committee on Ag, Food Resiliency and Forestry. My name is Dana Duran. I'm a resident of Belgrade, Maine. I drove over here this morning. It was one of the greatest drives ever because it was quiet and dark. It's time to do it. Not a lot of traffic on the road. And as Sam told you, there's not a lot of wood moving. So there were not a lot of log trucks in the way. I am the executive director of an organization called Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast. I'm going to go through my testimony. I'm not going to read all of it. I've given you written copies. I came prepared because I think paper is a good thing for our industry at least. And in Maine at the legislature, we always provide 25 copies as standard procedure. So Maine hasn't gotten rid of the paper form yet. So if I do the same thing, it's just because I've been trained for the last 10 years to do that. So as Sam alluded to, Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast is a trade association that started in Maine as the PLC of Maine in 1995. I've known Sam since 2016. I've gotten to know Representative Lipsky over the last year and a half. It's what we call a traditional trade association that represents loggers and log haulers in the state of Maine. In 2022, Vermont contractors came to our organization and said, would you be willing to expand to Vermont? And we said, sure, took a board vote. The board approved it unanimously, and that ensued a series of discussions about who the PLC is, but then what's the interest in Vermont? We weren't going to come to Vermont unless Vermont contractors wanted us to come. So we had a series of meetings starting in December of 2022. We hosted about 50 contractors at a meeting in Barrie, unanimous support throughout the room to pursue this. In May of 2023, our membership voted to change our bylaws, to change our name, and we officially moved forward. We have, since that point in time, selected 3 board members of our organization are from the state of Vermont. So Sam Lincoln is one of those board members. Jack Bell, who I think is going to be appearing over my shoulder here in a little while, representing his business. Longview Forestry of Heartland and Gabe Russo of Southwind Forest in Paulet has also been elected. We also have had 15 new members join our organization since the beginning of October. We have 5 new members that have submitted applications, so we'll have 20 here within the next 2 weeks. So there's been significant interest from contractors in the state of Vermont. To become a member of our organization, it's not simple. We don't just take an application and say, you're in. You have to have a workers' comp policy or be master logger certified and comply with all state laws regarding being a sole proprietor. And you also have to undergo a background check with the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. So every single applicant that we get has to go through that background check, and then they have to be formally approved by our board. So it's not an easy process. We want professional contractors that are meeting the rules, regulations, and abiding with state law and federal law to be members of our organization. So that's just brief background about why we're here and what we're doing. I've been in my position since 2014, predominantly we're an advocacy organization, but we do quite a few things regarding training, insurance, discount purchasing programs for our members. And we also have a philanthropic program called Log a Load for Kids. And since 1995, we have raised $2.2 million for children's hospitals in the state of Maine, and we're bringing that program to the state of Vermont. So we're quite proud of that work, especially considering what contractors go through on a daily and annual basis. They still dig deep to get back to their local community. So what I'm going to go over is what we've kind of developed as a policy platform. I apologize.
John?
Yep, sure.
To give us some context, are there other states now in the Northeast that are also part of PLC?
Sure. Good question, Representative. So as of right now, we are making our organization available to contractors throughout the Northeast. Vermont is the first state that has come kind of both feet in and said, we want you here. So, and that's the way we're treating it. We're not going to every state and planting a flag and saying we're here. We need a critical mass of contractors that want us there. And so Vermont has been that first guinea pig, I guess, so to speak. So hopefully that answers your question. So over the last year, we've had a steering committee of 15 contractors here in Vermont that has been meeting and has been working on a policy platform. And I'm going to present that policy platform to you. There's a phase 1 and a phase 2 to the approach. It's all included in my testimony. Phase 1 is what is before this committee, Representative Sims and Representative Lipsky are co-sponsors. I've referenced it at the top of page 2 in my testimony, but that's H624. Sam mentioned it, an act relating to providing financial assistance to the forest product economy. So phase 1 that's included in my testimony is what is essentially in that bill. And then phase 2 potentially is something for the future, just for your own consideration, but it all comes in context. So let me start with phase 1. So over the last 8 years in Maine, we've worked with the University of Maine on producing an economic impact study. That economic impact study has been published 3 times. It's critical to demonstrating and benchmarking what logging and trucking mean to the Maine economy. There's nothing that's been done like that here in the state of Vermont. So part of what we're putting before this committee is to work with the University of Vermont, the Center for Rural Studies, and to essentially benchmark what logging and trucking mean to the state of Vermont. Not as a full, but as a distinct and separate member of the full value chain. So we wouldn't study, okay, here's what the entire Vermont forest products economy means in terms of jobs, in terms of economic output, taxes, payroll, et cetera. But what does logging and trucking mean, so that we can present facts and figures and data as to the jobs, the employment, the wages, the capital expenditures, the types of equipment that are here in Vermont. That's never been done before. So that's one of the things we feel strongly before we can do anything else with respect to workforce development. We need to know and understand understand what logging and trucking means to the state of Vermont. So that's something that is, we have worked with Representative Sims and Representative Lipsky on the legislation to be included as a kind of a benchmarking study. So that's step one. From that, we also, Sam referenced, and so did Senator Starr, the work that was done in 2019 and 2020 on workers' comp. Workers' comp, obviously, you have to have workers' comp to be a member of our organization. We feel very strongly that employees in the forest have to be safe. They have to be protected. If there are accidents, they must have a safety net. And so safety training is critical to that. You have to lower risk. So a second piece that we have requested is some funding to try to help contractors get their employees trained, especially in mechanized logging, on what are the risk factors. What are the risks that they need to be trained on? And so bringing training that we've been doing in Maine for the last decade, and we've trained over 12,000 people have gone through one of our trainings, bringing that to the state of Vermont. Our trainings are different every year because the risks change every single year. So that would be a second step under phase one. Phase two, as you'll reference on the top of page 3, has to deal with career promotion and workforce development. I've just provided it to you because after we provide that benchmarking study, we know what the jobs look like now. We know what the jobs of the next 10 years look like. What are the forecasts on the types of jobs, logging, trucking, mechanics, back office. Then we can set up training in the state of Vermont. We can take a look at the secondary system. We can take a look at the post-secondary system, and we can make recommendations. 8 years ago, we created a mechanized logging operations and forest trucking program with the community college system in Maine. We've trained 100 individuals who've gone through that program in the last 7 years. It's a 20-week training program. A student who goes through that program goes through 12 weeks of on-the-job training on 7 pieces of mechanized training equipment, and they also walk out with a commercial driver's license now. We want to bring that program here to the state of Vermont, but we need to know, we need to benchmark what are the jobs, what do they look like, then we can determine, okay, this is what it's going to cost, and here's how we partner with industry and the state legislature to do so. So that's, again, phase 2. Coming back to phase 1, Sam mentioned the situation with the floods, the warm weather, the winters. So trying to help contractors be or adapt to climate resilience is a measure that has to take place. In order to increase operating days, there are measures that have to take place in order for contractors to work in the woods. Those include sedimentation control, that includes skidder bridges, that includes, Sam mentioned, corduroying of trails, riprap, etc., so that you can prepare landings and prepare job sites with culverts so that in the case or in the event there is a large storm, contractors can continue to work. So in the state of New York, specifically in the New York City watershed, for the last 20 years, there's been a tremendous program that has actually paid contractors to implement those, essentially we're calling harvesting adaptation resilience procedures. And we would like to bring that to the state of Vermont so that in the event there's a large flood or is there a storm or there are winter conditions, contractors can remediate and continue to work. I think it is money that will be well spent, and every dollar that goes in will probably be essentially tripled or quadrupled because it'll continue to allow contractors to work, to pay their employees, to continue to buy equipment, and to keep that entire value chain running. So that's in our phase 1 idea. And lastly, which is also phase 1, which should have no impact upon the general fund here in the state of Vermont, is an idea that we're working on currently with the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation and the Department of Environmental Conservation. And that is to use currently appropriated federal funds from US EPA. State of Vermont receives EPA Clean Water Revolving Loan money. 15 years ago in Maine, we used that money to create a revolving loan program for contractors to invest in new low ground pressure harvesting equipment so that they could reinvest in their businesses, but that they could positively impact watersheds. And so the idea is to essentially carve out some of those already appropriated funds and set up a revolving loan program so that contractors can invest in low ground pressure equipment that in many respects costs anywhere from $500,000 to $850,000. It's not cheap. But if you can use these funds to lower the interest rates, a contractor can save $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 on interest, and it allows them to reinvest and to employ many of these climate resilience initiatives that I mentioned before, also in phase one. So we're working with the administration right now. We're not there yet, but we feel pretty positive, and I know Oliver is here from DPFR, and he can mention the work that we're doing behind the scenes on that. So I think that's enough for today. Happy to answer any questions that you might have, but appreciate the opportunity to be here and have feet on the ground in Vermont.
Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question for you about your request here that the PLC would like to see Vermont legislature invest in safety training. I'm curious, does the Maine legislature, how do they handle your training and how much does it cost?
Yep. So very good question. So the training that takes place in Maine started back in 1992. That was almost, 32 years ago. So at that point in time, the legislature did invest in it to get it off the ground, to help encourage contractors to lower the burden and basically allow them to comply with their workers' comp statute, which quite frankly is exactly what Vermont adopted in 2019. So this is a way to kickstart it. It's not meant to be long-term funding request year after year after year. It's really meant to be a bridge. And so effectively what Vermont would be doing is the same thing that Maine did 30 years ago.
And what would the dollar cost be to that, do you think?
We've estimated about $100,000.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Annually.
Are you able to estimate at all if the adaptation resilience practices were in place that you're talking about, what the days that Sam was giving us in terms of days worked this year, what that would look like? What that would look like in a year like this with so much rain and flooding and then winter conditions?
Yeah, very good question, Representative Rice. I mean, I couldn't give you a data point specifically to say if X was done, here's the Y increase in days on the ground. That's probably a question better served to Sam, knowing the variable ground conditions. But I think it would be safe to assume that you could see a 25 to 30% increase in the number of days worked, just simply by employing some of those techniques, putting more gravel in a landing, putting a culvert in, bridges, et cetera. I mean, these are things that cost contractors money. And if they can't work, remember, logging is a cash-based business. If you don't deliver wood across a scale, you don't get paid. So if you can't work, there's no revenue coming in. So if you can employ some of these measures, it allows them to work, it allows wood to get loaded on a truck, and it allows that to get to Allard Lumber and then payments to be made. But unless you can do that, money just stops flowing.
Dave?
Just a real simple question on the economic impact study you mentioned. So it just says here, professional logging and trucking. I'm assuming trucking is specific to the logging industry, not trucking in general.
Correct. Yes. Yep. Good.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Dan, it's good to see you again. You mentioned that in order to join the PLC, there had to be sort of an alignment with statutes in both Maine and Vermont in terms of people that are joining. How different are the laws in Maine from what we have here? And if you could just talk about that for a second.
Sure. They're almost, I wouldn't say identical. In terms of workers' comp statute, it is quite consistent. The sole proprietor situation in Vermont is a little bit different. In Maine, you actually have to get a statement of self-determination from the Maine Department of Labor in order to show that you're a sole proprietor and exempt from workers' comp. Vermont, you don't have to do that. So that would be the only change. Vermont, or I should say Maine, has a much more diverse set of Forest Practices Act regulations that folks have to comply to or with than Vermont does. So in terms of that background check that I was talking about, the Maine Forest Service has significant resources on investigations and compliance and et cetera than Vermont does. So, that enforcement piece is much, much different. So you won't see as much of evidence with individual companies, but there are a lot of similarities.
So would it be fair to say that the Vermont guys, gals, kind of had an easier time with it? And then maybe the Maine, that sounds like Maine may be a little bit more restrictive, or?
It's become more restrictive over time. I think when PLC first started, if we go back 29 years now to 1995, the Forest Practices Act hadn't been passed yet. The workers' comp reforms had just come around. So if we compare apples to apples and snapshot in time, it's pretty consistent. Other than that small sole proprietor piece that I talked about. So good question, Senator.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Starr, and thank you, Dana. Just for the record, my name is Jed Lipsky, and for full disclosure, I have worked on an advisory committee with the PLC of the Northeast, and proudly so. I'm also been honored as Sam Lincoln has been. We are current master certified loggers, and there's a connection between the PLC, the Trust to Conserve Northeast Forests, and the Master Logger Certification Program. And the biggest part of that connection has to do with the integrity and the responsibility that loggers need to uphold in order to continue with the best practices and most environmentally responsible practices. So I just want to weigh in on a question that Representative Rice brought up, and also Senator Collimore. This issue of armoring a landing which protects municipal roadways or other public ways from any deleterious impacts from heavy loads or turbidity that could potentially reach waterways. That's a very specific and critical expense. And our bill, I include what Representative Sims and I are co-sponsoring, does address that particular challenge. But what I just, for everyone in this room, and you've heard me over previous session, responsibilities that timber harvesters face from ecological, water quality, wildlife, bird habitat, soil productivity, as well as adapting to outdoor recreation demands on forest land, has increased over the last couple of decades. But right now, those responsibilities have never been greater, and we expect with all the climate impacts, they will continue to rise. So that has forced many contractors to invest in what we refer to as low ground pressure, most environmentally responsible. And I have been engaged in that low ground, particularly forwarding, harvesting, and track equipment. And that has significantly allowed me over the years, although I'm a small contractor, to continue working. And I would estimate over the last decades, probably added about 25 or 30% to my production. So that is an important issue moving forward, but also a huge cost. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was wondering, how is that bill been introduced here on the House side?
It's on our wall.
Oh, so you have it?
Yeah, it's right up.
Yeah, good.
Right up there, I believe.
Yeah. John?
Dana, how have the other state governments responded to this loss of revenue crisis that's going on?
It's interesting you bring that up. So a couple things. I know the committee had asked Sam about federal assistance in the past. So back during the pandemic, you obviously had the PPP. We worked very hard with our national organization to get a program, essentially a one-time program to deal with revenue loss called the Pandemic Assistance for Timber Harvesters and Haulers. Very successful program. It was a nationwide program in 2021. Since that moment in time, there's been no other funding source to assist. So Vermont went through this summer, and we painstakingly discovered that there were no programs available, federal or state. Maine just had a big storm December 18th. So Monday, I'm meeting with Secretary Vilsack from USDA is coming to Portland with Congresswoman Pingree, and I'm meeting with him. We've just surveyed the Maine members over the last 3 weeks to find out what their income loss looks like. Looks like they have lost somewhere between $3 and $5 million. I'll have the final results at 5 o'clock today when the results are due. But that's something we're going to bring to our governor in Maine, as well as to Secretary Vilsack, to see what can be done. So I don't have an answer on that. What I will say is that the same things that we're presenting to this committee with respect to forward-thinking climate resilience measures, equipment investments, are the same measures we're promoting in the state of Maine, because these things have to happen. And I guess bringing it to a close, we're not trying to say replace income and wages. What we're trying to do is to look at what can we do to get folks to work so that they continue to produce, to make revenue, to pay their employees. We don't want to lean on the government and say, please bail us out every time this happens. That's not where we want to go. We don't want to promote that, but we want to get folks to work. And that's the bottom line. I'd rather do that all day long than ask for a handout. So, yeah.
You have something, Shane?
If I may, Senator, thank you. And to add to that, I think to Dana's point, is our vision for this is as Vermont looks for resilience and adaptation in climate practices, loggers are working hundreds of logging sites a year. And if you start putting pins on a map where we've implemented these better practices, more durable practices, we're securing that land from sedimentation, erosion, larger impacts with the necessary tools and equipment and practices to get that done. That's what we're looking ahead saying we want to do. And we can play a big role in the state's response, and again, in adaptation and resilience in the future.
It would seem to me it's quite important to get that impact study done, because the first thing that we're going to get asked when we get to appropriations, some facts and figures. And so has there been any movement on that with UVM?
So we've had some really good discussions with both UVM and the Center for Rural Studies. UVM didn't feel like it had the resources within the forestry department because they don't have a forest economist on staff. But the Center for Rural Studies, we just had a discussion 2 weeks ago. They actually just got back to Sam and I on Wednesday, and they felt confident that they had the person power and the access to the software to assist. A lot of this entire exercise revolves around getting data from contractors, and contractors are resilient because they're independent businesses to provide information to state agencies, to others, just because they're businesses. They don't like to give that information up. So you need an organization like ours that can work with them and build that trust to then get that information. So anyway, that's, again, we're not there yet, but we have had some positive conversations with the Center for Rural Studies on that.
Great.
Yep.
Yes.
You want to think about here is we cover with ourselves. And I know we talked to foresters that can't get people to cut these jobs that are due for land use program because there's not enough people, not enough parties to do it. And so it could jeopardize the whole land use plan that the state is trying to keep it working.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you've got a 10-year plan.
Right, exactly. We've seen that, I could tell you many times. And the other thing is, with the weather, they're gonna pick the loggers, which they need to do. They're gonna pick the ones they can harvest, and the others, because of capital expenses and equipment, they're not gonna get cut.
Yeah.
Senator Starr, would you mind if I just added to what Mr. Allard was talking about? So I mentioned in here that community college training program. So I'm sure all the folks in the room are aware that Vermont Tech essentially is eliminating their forestry program, which is bad news. So one of the ideas is that we bring our community college program here to Vermont. Maybe, hopefully it's in Randolph Center, it's at Vermont University. We bring it every other year, every third year. It's not something where we have to recreate the wheel. We've been running this program for 7 years in Maine. We know how it runs. What we need to do is then bring it here. I mean, I will tell you, this is a multi-million-dollar program. It's not paid for by the state legislature. Essentially, about $250,000 a year comes out of the Maine legislature to help with that program. The rest of it's coming from the manufacturers. So we have 7 pieces of mechanized harvesting equipment that if you bought them brand new, it's $5 million. The manufacturers give us the equipment to run because they look at it as McDonald's. If you train someone cradle to grave, here's your Happy Meal. You know, in 25 years, are you still buying a hamburger at McDonald's? It's the same way with manufacturers, and that's the way they look at it. So it's an amalgamation, but it's a collaborative effort between industry, the legislature, and the manufacturers for workforce training. And we think it's a great model. And we could bring it here to Vermont as well, and maybe do it at Vermont Tech if that forestry program truly goes away.
Well, we've got on the Senate side, we've got people from Vermont Tech coming in. I don't know if it's either the tail end of next week or the first part of the following week, because the ag program is in the same shape as the timber program. So we've got the people coming in to explain to us what their procedure and what's going to be included in the program starting in September. Yeah, we're aware that it's not a good issue to be losing. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, I know, like, in reference to that, the issue around both ag and forestry seems to be an enrollment issue. You know, they wouldn't shut down a program that had people wanting to do it. So I'm wondering, in Maine, do you guys, is there any education outreach? Are you in school? Like, there seems to be need for promotion at an early level to encourage people that this, and also obviously we need to fix the problem of making it a profitable industry. So it's something that people want to go into, but just wondering how you address the education piece.
Sure. So if you look at my testimony on page 3, I talk exactly to that point, Representative Pearl, and that is career promotion. You know, we work very hard in Maine in getting into secondary schools, but we also work with post-secondary because there are a lot of applicable trade programs where folks go through a welding program, a heavy equipment operations, a diesel hydraulics program, and they're a natural fit to come into logging or trucking. But the direct answer is yes. So we have a teacher's tour in the summertime that we run to bring secondary school teachers out and get them immersed in the forest products industry so that they can see the jobs of the future. And it's not just logging and trucking, it's forestry, it's mill manufacturing, could even be recreation. And then we also do a lot of promotion, television advertising, social media to advertise and promote the jobs of the future. Interesting fact point, I should have brought copies of our economic impact study, but in 2017, the data point in logging and trucking alone said the average salary was $47,000 in rural Maine in the job. We just released the findings of the latest study in March of 2023, which was 2021 data, but the salary had increased almost $20,000. Pandemic, et cetera, demand, all those things. But if you can go through a 20-week training program and walk out making $65,000 to $70,000 with zero debt, it's pretty good for a rural area. And I don't care if you're in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York. That's pretty good. So I would challenge anybody to find a program like that where they can walk out with zero debt and start making that kind of money, but only if they can work. So.
Other questions? Sam?
Thank you, Senator. I just wanted to add to that as a business owner, logging contractor, of the policy proposals, the one that I'm the most excited about is that workforce forecast. The idea that we can work and find out how many empty seats and machines there are, how many people we need to do these jobs, and start taking action to recruit those young Vermonters, middle-aged Vermonters, however, whatever age, and put them, train them, and get them into this industry. And because it's exciting. It's a very actionable thing that we can do. So I'm really, really supportive of that.
So, does the study program, are they all set to go, or do they need any direction from us, or up at UVM, the rural studies? Is that rolling?
It's going to take funding, Senator Starr. So I think, included, we put a estimate into Representative Lipsky and Representative Sims' bill of about $100,000 to get that done. We're going to get that done sometime in 2024.
That's in the bill?
Yes.
That's in your bill?
It is. And I would add a comment that we have interacted with Commissioner Fitzko with FPR. And they also have a lot to contribute, and some data, not complete range of data, and a vital interest in seeing that study happen. As a number of witnesses have said, that's critical importance, in particularly you, Senator Starr. So there is a collaboration with FPR.
And I'll speak to that in my remarks. Sure. I believe Mr. Bell is next in order.
Well, we got one up on the screen.
He's up there.
Jack Bell.
Jack, can you hear us, Jack?
I can. Can you hear me?
Sure, yeah. Welcome to the process.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but the good news is that it's one of the very first kind of good weather logging days out there that we've had in a very long time. So I'm not logging right now, but it's very busy here today, and I'm grateful to Sam and Jed for getting there in person, because I'm sure that's a big sacrifice to not be in the woods this morning working with how it's been. As I said, my name is Jack Bell. I live in Putney, Vermont. I co-founded a business called Longview Forest in the year 1999. So we're in our 25th year of business. We're based in Westminster and Heartland, Vermont, over in the Connecticut River Valley. We have today 37 employees, 13 of whom are employee owners of the company. We started as a small logging only business, but we've grown and diversified over the years. And right now, of our employees, about half are working directly in logging and logging related activities every day. A quarter are in forestry consulting and related services, invasive plant control, other things. And the other quarter are in our most recent new activities, forestry equipment sales, as well as some administrative staff. I'm also one of 3 Vermont board members with the PLC of the Northeast. Sam recruited me to get involved with that organization a year or so ago, and been really excited and impressed with it as an opportunity for Vermont logging businesses. So I just thought, I'd just talk a little bit about what the weather impacts have been on our business. We're a mission-driven, mission-focused business. Our mission is to do forestry, to grow and harvest trees and be a contributing part of the Vermont forest products economy. We do plenty of other things to earn money, but that's, the reason for our businesses being. And, we're out to try to help produce some of the materials that we all use so much of. And we, believe that Vermont and its forests and soils is a place that's very, very capable of doing that, and that these materials are going to come from somewhere. And if they're not coming from here, coming from somewhere else, and they may or may not be produced in as good a way as we can do it here. And then also, I'm a big believer in wood as a really good raw material to use compared with the alternatives of plastics and metals and concrete and others, from overall energy and carbon and environmental impact perspective. So, some of our biggest goals in our business and trying to build and accomplish our mission are to have really good jobs in the business. And that means competitive pay, benefits, and we find that there's a lot of people that want to work in this industry, from a variety of walks of life, from the traditional backgrounds of logging and forestry, but also plenty of other people. Like, I had no background in any of this. I grew up in New Hampshire, but just wanted to work outdoors and get involved in natural resources. And so I find there's a lot of people that want to be part of this industry, but the quality of the jobs is a big hindrance. A lot of people try it, and then if they have other alternatives, they go elsewhere because of higher pay, better benefits, but also and absolutely to the weather question, consistent pay. In general, people that are employees in businesses, in logging businesses, are paid hourly. If people are running their own business, obviously it's as Dana was saying, just whatever they can produce on any given day. So the consistency of income is really a big factor for people working in forest products industry, and especially logging. You can imagine that, like pretty much every time it rains, if you're a logger, you are lying in bed with dread for whether or not you'll be able to work in the morning. And they're probably out there, but I don't know what other types of work are like that, where you have an awareness of the weather overnight and into the morning, and that's going to affect whether or not you can earn a paycheck the next day. It is a bad feeling any times, but especially in these times when we have had so much terrible weather. Thinking of just what my experience has been, prior to the last few years, Irene was the signature weather event for us in our business's history, because I remember when that happened in 2011, we had pretty much a total stop of our operations for something like a month. As we all know who were here for that, just so disruptive. Roads disappeared. We just had a complete total stop of operations, and we never had that before. But that was really only about a month long, and in the scheme of things, it was dramatic, but it fell within the range of what we're used to. We have a month or two of spring mud season and slow times in the fall, so it still felt sort of within the range of something like normal. But then, I'd say these last, 2020 through today, the last 3-4 years have been incredibly different. The pandemic, there was the shutdown from the pandemic that was such a panic with everything freezing up. And in the forest products industry, there was just a total concern of everything being stopped. And that luckily was short-lived. And we wondered in the spring of 2020 whether we'd be able to work it all that summer. But after a brief period, we went back to work, and as it turned out, it was a pretty good time for the logging business, really, through 2020. Decent weather, markets came back, and then we were able. Somebody asked earlier about the PPP program, and our business, we did tap into that. We did pay employees to be at home for periods of time when the business was shut down. A whole bunch of people that have worked in the logging business for a long time here said it was the only spring where they ever didn't have financial stress, because we had PPP funds and we were paying people based on their average pay right through spring 2020. And that stood out as the only spring for a bunch of our logging staff where they didn't have financial stress because they had a steady paycheck. And, you know, we're not a business that lays people off or sends people home. We've committed that people can always come to work and work a regular full week. But a lot of our guys, if it's sweeping the floor and doing things that aren't incredibly obviously needed, they'd rather stay home and do something else, scout hunting or whatever it may be. So they sort of, you know, we provide work, but they, you know, just want to get back to their normal work. So spring is always a stressful time. You know, 2021, we had down here in southern Vermont, like, you know, over 30 inches of rain in the month of July. And that was more disruptive than Irene. That was unbelievably difficult summer, stretched right on through. That was a time when a group of legislators were going around the state visiting job sites, and we were due to host one of those visits, I think, in July. Or I remember it was right around that time because Paul Frederick kept asking, like, are we really going to be able to visit an active job site? Because he knew what the weather was. And we had an active job site, and the guys on the job were saying, do we really want to have people come and visit? It's pretty ugly out here. And I appreciated where they were coming from because it wasn't our favorite type of work to be doing with the mud that was happening. But, you know, my answer was like, no, that's absolutely what people need to see, is come see what we're dealing with and what we're struggling with, because that is something we face all of the time. Is like, what do we do? Do we not have work for people to do? Do we, as has been being discussed, do we spend more money on gravel, excavator time? What do we do? And we're facing that all the time, more and more and more. And 2021 was, before this year, definitely the worst stretch we'd had. But that turned around, and 2022 was really very good weather, June through October, like fabulous weather. But now, since November 2022, it's been terrible. It's 14, 15 months continuous of absolutely terrible logging weather. We have been logging, but it's been pretty much, last winter never really froze. It was a terrible and short winter for logging. And, you know, we never really came out of spring and got any good weather before this summer's rain started. And it really continues. I mean, it's been wet, obviously, and mild through December. And so we've had, you know, one of the guys was around the shop this morning, and he said it's the longest in 10 years. It's the longest stretch he's had of being out of the woods, a month and a half since he was logging. And that's a guy that logs every day, all year round for us. But he's been here at the shop, like working on equipment and doing whatever he can to keep busy. So that has been difficult. Our business's logging production, it peaked in the year 2020 at 22,000 cords. In 2021, our logging production dropped to 14,000 cords. In 2022, it was 12,000 cords. This year, we're 8 months into our fiscal year. So we produced 6,000 cords. So we produced 1/3, less than 1/3 of what we produced in a full year 3 years ago. Some of that is that we are not trying to produce as much wood. We've diversified away from logging. We're doing a lot more land clearing, which is kind of the opposite of what our mission is. But we get paid to clear land. We're doing a lot of excavation work that, again, is not what our mission is, but we, like many other loggers, just have to do whatever we can to pay ourselves and keep the business going. So we've shifted significantly away from timber harvesting and logging work to other things, related things that we can do. We don't really want to do that, but we've had to. Until this year, we had pretty much maintained our business revenues on balance through that shift to services. But this year, our revenues are at about 65% of budget. Because even with the shift to services, there's so many days when we can't work or it's hard to work. And our costs are up by 30%. I didn't have enough time to look at everything I wanted to, but I did look. We have spent $72,000 in the last 3 years on mats, wooden mats, and bridge panels. And those are used. Those are cheap used ones at $50 to $100 a piece. So that's about $25,000 a year. And before I looked back, and before 2019, I didn't find any records of us spending any money on wooden mats. But I was going to, but I didn't have time to look at gravel. I was also going to look at the number of excavator and bulldozer hours in the business, because without looking, I know that our spending on stone and gravel and our spending on excavator and bulldozer hours that no one pays us for because it's just part of logging work, all those things have increased similarly. So I figure we've had about $25,000 a year of wooden mat expense. We can use those 1 to 3 times, laying them down on the ground to protect sections of truck road or landing or skid roads that we're using. We can use them 1 to 3 times, and then they're trashed and we have to dispose of them. I figure the cost of the mats is probably 1/3 of the total cost of dealing with them, because we have to pay to haul them back and forth in between job sites. So if we probably have somewhere in the range of $2,500 of added trucking expense to just move them between job sites, because we usually need multiple truckloads of these things to cover any ground area. And then of course we have to install them. We need equipment on site to place them on the ground, do some minor excavation, set them onto the ground, and then remove them. And then we have to dispose of them as well. We have to haul them back to one of our sites, and usually we burn them eventually, because they're just sort of all beaten up and they're not something you can leave behind on people's properties. So that's just an unbelievable added expense. And I figure that if our production was not down, I'd say that would be adding something like 10 to 15% to our total average logging cost. But at the same time that we're seeing all that additional expense, that's spread across less volume production, because we've been, that expense is pretty much all in timber harvesting. We don't have those kind of expenses when we're doing land clearing work or excavation work. So I didn't have time, but it's a very, very significant increase to our logging costs. So those are some sad anecdotes, but that's kind of what we've been experiencing. I love the proposals that have been put together here, and we would absolutely benefit from and try to take advantage of any assistance, cost share sorts of funding around this kind of work to protect soils and allow logging work to happen. It would benefit water quality. It would help get people to work. It would be a big help for us in trying to continue to pursue our mission and contribute to the forest products economy in Vermont.
Well, thank you, Jack, for your testimony and the time you've given us in regards to this. Are there any questions from the committee members? No? Thanks, Jack, and you can stay on if you've got time, and now, would you like to say a few words?
I'd love to, Chair. I know I'm fifth, and there's Mr. Allard is on the agenda before me, so I want to respect that.
We still got one over here.
I think Trevor's.
Trevor?
Are you okay for time?
Well, what time will we gotta be?
11:30.
We got 2 more minutes.
So one, if I may, if the Senate members of the group need to be on the Senate floor, I think shortly, we have extra time. We're available till noon, and would be happy to hear the testimony from the folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet, and then perhaps you could check in with them later or watch it on television.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we do that then?
So maybe we should leave before we get started, and then we won't interrupt you. But before we leave, I want to again thank all of you folks for coming. And I think probably most of us have some forest industry in our district. And I know Ethan Allen, up my way, they aren't loggers, but they certainly use a lot of maple and high-grade timber, and they're having a hard time getting the product that they need. And hopefully we'll be able to get that bill going that you folks have got. And
yeah, and I don't want to get too far out ahead of ourselves because we haven't had a chance to, most people aren't even aware of its existence, but we'll have conversations.
You got it on the
our wall, yeah.
Well, we need it on the desk.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Good to see you, Sam.
Yeah.
Hey, Sam, really good to see you.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, talk to you soon.
What's Michael Grady here for? Hey, thanks for the, I know you want.
I don't know.
It's his bill.
Catch up.
He's the one that drafted. Thank you.
Okay.
Bills, I'm assuming maybe.
So let's all just pause for a second. In fact, you know what I'm going to do, because we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. I apologize to the guests who've been waiting, but we need to take 5 minutes, I think, just to stretch. So let's do that. Are you all okay with that, Trevor? Cliff, I'm not sure which is which.
I'm Trevor, he's Cliff.
Okay, good. Well, just I want to give the committee 5 minutes to stand up and stretch. So.